This is Psychical. I wanted to take some time out from my usual Let's Plays to talk with Pointy about some of the issues with the Xbox One and the next generation of consoles. One of the issues with the Xbox One that bothers me, which I feel is overlooked, is that according to an interview from The Wired, all of the games on the Xbox One are going to require an installation in order to play. It's possible this policy will be reversed along with Microsoft's other policies, but I'm not aware of any plans to do so at the moment. The Xbox One requires an installation for every game. That includes friends games that they just bring over so you can play one time, or games that you're renting. They're all going to be installed on your hard drive. The Xbox One will launch with a 500 gigabyte hard drive. Now that might seem like a lot, but during the Xbox 360's launch, it had around 30 gigabytes, and that seemed like a lot at the time too. Games are constantly taking up more and more hard drive space. For example, Uncharted 3 on the PlayStation 3 takes up more than 40 gigabytes. So if this trend continues, you could run out of space in just a dozen games, which I really consider to be a big problem in the long term. What's your take on this, Pointy?
Hi, this is Pointy, and I'm kind of defending on behalf of the Xbox One. I understand your idea, like why you think this is a bad thing, but on the other hand, I look at the notion that there have already been PlayStation and Xbox 360 day one downloads where a full game can be downloaded from the computer, from the internet, and installed to the Xbox. And this is much in the same idea that the Xbox One would actually just load up what it needs off the disk. I do believe that you are correct. It's still required of the Xbox One that all games be downloaded. Because this is mainly done, the Blu-ray is kind of slow at taking the data off the disk, and it's locked into a certain speed. When a game is downloaded to the actual machine itself and installed on the machine, it can load up much quicker, and you just see load times, resource pop-ups, all the kind of things on the machine. It can do quite more efficiently than if it's just taking it off the disk. I think that's the one major benefit, is it's quicker to load, and I don't see them really requiring. They know exactly that there's a 500 gigabyte limit, and it may increase in the future. But I also see that's maybe where cloud computing comes into play. There's a whole lot of ways to get around that issue, and I think the benefits outweigh the just what would be required if it's just reading off the disk. You're looking back at the slow load times and all of that.
I mean, I can understand there's an advantage to installing a game and that it decreases load time, but on the Xbox 360, it's optional, and on the Xbox One, it's mandatory, or at least that's my understanding of it. So I don't see what's wrong with just keeping it optional, because if I have like 10 or 20 games, and I might just want to play one and not necessarily care that much about the slower load times if I just want to play a game once or twice. But on the Xbox One, it just seems like it would be really inconvenient to have to install the game every single time you want to play a new game.
Well, I know your concern is valid, but what I see happening is now what they've really said is if you're starting to install or even download a game with cloud computing, you can actually start a game immediately right when you start downloading it. It's running it off a different server. That may be a little bit slower than if you're running it off your home machine, but that's especially if you're playing a demo or you're starting to download it and to use up space, but you could start playing it immediately. So the concern of, well, I just want to play this game for a small amount of time, it's true that you might not want to download the whole entire game and use that space up on your hard drive, but I could also see the potential that they could have the whole game just on the virtual console and you wouldn't even have to load anything onto your machine. I think that's a possibility with the Xbox One and with the PlayStation 4. And I'm also thinking that with the knowledge that people will not want to install a whole entire 40 gigabyte game.
Hey, sorry to
then
interrupt you, but I just wanted
oh
to
yeah,
clarify something. Are you talking about like OnLive where you don't download any of it and it streams directly to your console? Or are you
uh,
talking about downloading it partially and then just playing the section that you downloaded?
correct. I don't know how they've implemented the feature. I've heard kind of various ways that it's just a smart system that they have set up where when you start downloading it, kind of like with World of Warcraft or Diablo 3, when you start installing the game from a download, after about 25% of all the information being
Mm-hmm.
loaded onto your system, you can start playing it. There are certain information, I guess the sound and the texture files of later levels have not all been loaded. What they have in the beginning, that's all loaded. But also with the cloud computing, that would be completely online. Nothing would be on your system. You would be playing it on a system outside of the Xbox One. And Microsoft has already shown that they've been building server banks. They've gone into this, and some of the promises are a little bit iffy if they can actually pull it off. But I do believe that with the cloud computing, you're going to see gameplay even off a machine.
So my take on it was that PlayStation 4 was adopting the new Gaikai technology, so you'd actually be able to stream demos with none of the data on your console, just like streaming a YouTube video. With the Xbox One, I could be wrong about this. I thought they were just doing it where you download part of the game and then you just immediately start playing the fourth or the section that you downloaded, but that's not the same as streaming it. It's still storing data on your console. I was thinking in terms of like if a friend brought a game over to my house to play it, and I just wanted to play it one time, then it'd install the game, and then maybe I'd have to delete the game after it was done. So maybe Xbox is doing something similar to OnLive and Gaikai and PlayStation 4. I just haven't heard about that yet.
Hmm. And I think because we're still getting news kind of leaked in, or it may even happen at a later point in the Xbox One's lifespan. With the Xbox 360, there are features like achievements, Xbox Live, which were, like in the case of Xbox Live, it was there, in not the same capacity that it is now. I would see with the Xbox One, they're kind of future-proofing it, and with the ability to cloud compute, there are further abilities that may not even be in the works now, but come about 2 to 3 years from now, there'll be major factors in the enjoyment of the system.
So I have two problems with that. One is that if it's just speculation, like maybe they'll have it and maybe they won't. And if they were going to have this feature, that they would be emphasizing it more, so it's like it's just wishful thinking to say that Xbox One is going to have this. And number two is that if you're going to just be streaming it from a server, I'm not an expert on this, but it just seems to me that it would be slower than just playing the game off your physical media. And on top of that, it requires an internet connection. And plus, it doesn't really fit the description of an installation if you're streaming it off the server. So that just wasn't my understanding of what Xbox One's plans are, but their plans are changing so quickly that it's difficult for me to sort of keep up with the news as far as that goes.
And I kind of agree with that. We don't know where it stands. I'm sure if we read up on it, we'll kind of see a little bit more of what the cloud computing and what they have planned. But I think until the system comes out, even I can't say exactly what that means.
All right. So another point I wanted to go over was that Microsoft is charging $500 for their console, which is $100 more than the PlayStation 4 and $150 more than the premium Wii U model. So one of the reasons I heard was that it was because they were including the Kinect, and the Kinect is apparently, I've heard some rumors that the Kinect is even almost as expensive as the console itself, but I really don't understand why they're emphasizing this Kinect so much. It really isn't something that's interested me much, so it kind of bothers me that they're making this mandatory and that they're charging an extra price on top of it. I'd rather they just drop the Kinect and drop the price of the Xbox One with it.
To me, the Kinect is what we're basing our assumptions off of, is the previous generation of Kinect, which, to be honest, it just wasn't that good for the majority of gamers who are kind of in a smaller room, or you're just dealing with a piece of hardware that, while it was interesting, the abilities were severely limited by just how it was reading the room, how it was functioning, even on a software level. It just wasn't all there because the Xbox 360 doesn't have the kind of processing power to take in data and then to kind of correspond that to a video game. This is a device that was made for the Xbox 360. I have to look at the dates, but about halfway through its life. Now you're seeing a machine that's almost based around the Kinect. They've had it from day one. They've known what the capabilities are, and they can actually integrate it into the operating system, which, while the Xbox 360 had some Kinect features, I think we're almost looking to a new level of what you can do with the Kinect and just how you operate your machine, what it can do, and just how actual input will be so much better. So I think it's kind of looking at the Wii. When you first saw that, I didn't have much interest in the motion control or just how it was working, but that was a system based around motion control, and certainly it took off. Games that were made for it knew that there was that element. They knew every person who would buy that machine had a motion control. Now, you look at the PlayStation 3, that has a motion control too, but not many games, hardly at all, had that functionality built in, or even with the 360, had no Kinect functionality. Now a game developer can say, okay, we're making the game for the Kinect. We know people will have the Kinect, so let's make some features of it.
That makes sense. I think it's going to be an improvement to the previous generation, so I can kind of understand the rationale behind including it or making it mandatory, but at the same time, that $500 price point just seems like it's too much of a deterrent to get a lot of the people into the market. I feel like I don't want to spend that much right off the bat. This is just wishful thinking, because I was expecting more from Microsoft at E3, like they would be showing more detail on what you could do with the Kinect. They just haven't. They don't really have enough ready. They don't have enough to show us, considering how quickly the Xbox One is coming out. It's almost like they're just saying, trust us, this is going to be really good. And even at the E3 demo, I heard that they were using PC versions of the games that were supposed to come out on an Xbox One. So
that was actually... they later revealed that the majority of games were running on the Xbox One hardware, or at least the PCs resembling the Xbox. The story, and I read the same exact story that you read, later revealed that that particular game, they were having trouble getting the Xbox One version out, so they made a PC version just to run, and it's a game that's coming out for the Xbox One. It just wasn't ready at E3.
Okay. So it was only that one game that was running on the PC?
It was only that one game that was running on a primarily PC version. There's no real Xbox functionality of that gameplay in effect. I can't say. I don't know exactly what all the other presenters were using, but I have heard that the majority were using the Xbox One.
I don't know, I just feel like the Xbox One is coming out later this year, so they really should have it together more to still be using a PC when the Xbox One comes out in 4 months, and then you have to deal with shipping and distributing the thing. I sort of makes me think, and again, I'm just speculating, but it makes me think maybe the Xbox One isn't prepared to launch this year. Maybe they don't have it together. Maybe it's going to be a rushed console. So another thing that bothers me about the Xbox One is this is a minor thing. I mean, it's not a deal breaker. It's advertisements on the dashboard. So they said advertisements won't be visible on the home page, but they're still going to find a way to put it in there. And I remember I heard this one interview that said Xbox One is going to be designed with advertising in mind. So which kind of bothers me because you're paying $60 for the yearly subscription fee, and I don't see advertisements on the Wii. I don't see it on the PS3 and on Steam. They have advertisements, but it's just for their own games. And like on Xbox 360 dashboard, I see advertisements for like Mazda and car commercials and Doritos and insurance. I just think you shouldn't see those when you're already paying so much for it.
I think that's a valid complaint, and to say where that money from the advertisements go, you could say, oh, do we make the system cheaper because we have those advertisements in there, or can we offer better service because we're not losing as much money from this? I couldn't say why. I mean, it's a benefit for them. They're making more money. If PlayStation 4 had it, would it cost less? I just really couldn't tell you. That's something that annoys me too, so I can't really say much about it. But
Because
you would think any company that is using advertisements, well, they're making more money, so in some way, shape, or form, they might be passing along that benefit to us. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
I'm just thinking in terms of the Xbox 360 system, they're the only console out of the three that made you pay for Xbox Live. They have all these constant downloadable contents for their games, which the Wii doesn't have all that much downloadable content. The Sony and the Xbox 360 charged $60 for their game, and the Wii charged $50. And what else can I think of? It's just, basically every turn it seems like Microsoft is charged, and the Xbox 360 is charging more and more for these games. I don't feel like I'm getting as good of a deal as I do on the other console. And then on top of that, there's ads. If I thought I was getting like a cheaper deal on the Xbox 360, I'd probably give it a pass, but the way they're charging so much, I don't really think that's something that should be included.
And once again, it's harder for me to really gauge, like, it's a subjective notion about how much enjoyment you're getting out of the game, and it's also subjective with how much you're disliking the ads. They're annoying, but I look at TV channels. A TV channel that has more ads would be annoying, but are they having the same shows? Now, that's kind of hard to say with the Xbox and PlayStation 3 because you're seeing a lot of the same content, but the question would be, is the Xbox One good enough to take the price, take those advertisements, and still have a positive experience? Would you have a better experience with the PlayStation 4 without the ads? I couldn't tell you. Now, to me, ads, while annoying, are kind of easily ignored. I have some worries about how much they're tracking facial recognition, what you're looking at, and if they're going to implement that as a, like, okay, we're going to put an advertisement right here where everyone looks when they first start a game. That worries me, but this is once again kind of worrying about the future, and come when that comes.
You mentioned facial recognition thing. Now, I know I don't like to get into this. It's too political. It sounds sort of like tinfoil hat stuff, but I actually think it is a legitimate concern now when they have the connected mandatory as a part of every console. It's always on, and Microsoft is admitted to being part of the NSA, where they're tracking all that information on people, they're tracking cell phone calls. So I just tend to think, if they have a Kinect in that house and the NSA says, we want this information, we want you to track this information, then Microsoft's going to do it. And I feel a little uneasy with that. I think it's gotten to the point where it's actually believable now, and it's not just something that is being spouted by conspiracy theorists or paranoid people. But, and I at least think they're going to use it to help in advertising in some way, shape, or form. Like they're going to hear a conversation in your room, and then that conversation is going to influence the advertising you see somehow. Does that bother you at all? Or?
It does. Now, once again, I also have a netbook with a camera on it, a laptop with a camera on it, and a cell phone with a camera on it, and I always take for granted that that camera is off when I tell it to be off. There have been cases when Now this could be science fiction, but they can turn on speakers, they can turn on that camera with the virus or just by backhacking it, government approval. With the Xbox One, they're saying that functionality of the Xbox itself, and this goes back to basing a system around the Kinect. It's kind of like with the Wii, if you all of a sudden said, okay, you have a console, but you do not have any motion controls, how would that affect the user experience? Now, even in the dashboard of the Wii, you use the controller, the motion controller, to pick out games and whatnot. I think that's the kind of level of disruption you'll see without the Kinect. I think that's also why they're mandating it to be plugged in when you play. Probably just selecting a game that would require you to move around. That's kind of my reasoning. Instead of thinking that, oh, this is for spying, I think because the system can actually be played offline now, that there are ways, if you don't plug it online, and it can't be saving data on your hard drive because HD cameras, that's going to quickly use up the space, and you're going to notice, okay, all of a sudden I have 300 gigabytes of information missing from my hard drive. Maybe it's saving information on me. I think because of those kind of reasons that it's just not going to be used to spy or used to save data on you, just because of the logistics of doing so would be so insane and noticeable.
But what about when you're online, which is probably going to be the majority of the time?
And once again, I say, if they built a system around spying, then it's just kind of like a cell phone. Well, that's always online too. My computer is always online. Now, I could worry about the advertisements, but there's so much information that, say, if I'm getting a good user experience, I'm enjoying my Xbox One, and I'm enjoying it with the Kinect, then if the fact that they use it to make that advertisement that much more engaging, or however they're going to use the Kinect with it, then I will be annoyed, but I can put up with that.
So I'm not saying that in and of itself is a deal breaker. I'm just bringing up point after point, and I feel like eventually, if there are enough points against the Xbox One, then maybe someone should reevaluate whether or not they want to get it. So that's just kind of one point of several.
Well, I look at it again being subjective. How much, if a negative point, say with me, the PlayStation 3, a negative point could be said that it didn't have Xbox 360 games. That's annoying. Negative point could be said it had issues with the RAM. The system had very little RAM, and because of that, there was not cross-chat. There was several features missing in some games. You could kind of look into all of these things that went into negatively affecting the experience, but I would say overall, I would love the PlayStation 3. I would buy another system if given the choice. With the Xbox, it's the same thing. I would have to pay for the internet, and that's annoying. The Kinect wasn't that good. That's annoying. But if I add those all together, I still see the Xbox 360 as being a positive experience. And I think with the Xbox One, you could say, okay, these issues are annoying, but how much is that advertisement in the corner going to really affect your buying habit? I would say if there was one advertisement put into the PlayStation 3 that kept annoying me, but I would still say, I'd buy the system. It's a good system.
And so another thing that bothers me about the Xbox One, and again, PlayStation 4 is apparently doing something similar to this now too. Of course, Xbox Live Gold is returning, which means you're going to have to pay the $60 per year in order to play your games online, and that's the differences from what I heard between the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 is that with PlayStation 4, if it's a free-to-play online game like Marvel or DC Universe, you can still play that for free online on the PlayStation 4. And for Xbox One, every single game that's online you have to pay for. And then on top of that, Xbox Live Gold is $60 a year, and PlayStation Plus is $50. And I'm not giving PlayStation a pass on this either, because that still really irritates me, but I kind of blame Microsoft for creating this system in the beginning, and basically consumers accepted this, and they kind of made it mainstream. And I almost feel like people are becoming desensitized to it now. Like it's the norm now. People are just expected to pay for online. But it still bothers me that they're putting that in there, for both Microsoft and Sony.
Well, to me, and the reason Sony has actually come out and said they are implementing a charge for online service is because to enable for them to meet the level of enjoyment for their online services. They want to offer a service that is quality, that players can enjoy, and to that goes how fast the servers run, how many people can be on the server at once, how downtime is affected. Just it goes from downloading a game. If you have a server on the Xbox and maybe it's just a small server, then it would take 100 people 9 hours to download a game. If they're spending more money and upgrade their server, then it would take 1 hour. And that kind of thing isn't readily apparent. You just notice, oh, this download's taken a lot longer, or oh, there's a lot more lag in this game, or oh, boy, I wish I could enter a game with more people. I think we're just seeing games that require more internet usage. There's more requirements for, say, Battlefield 3, where you're seeing 50 people fight versus each other and very little lag in between. And you kind of look at the issues that, say if you have a computer on a Minecraft server run on a PC, let's just run off some poor chap's internet or computer at home, and you're getting a very slow connection, maybe it just drops. You're kind of seeing the difference in quality, and because of that payment, they can afford to make the quality better. How much so, it's just, you can't really see Microsoft paying off bills with that $60 that you're paying them every year, but you do take for granted the games, the internet. If you just run onto Xbox Live, then you're enjoying a 8-person game and there's very little lag. If you do so on the PlayStation 4, I think there's going to be much better latency, better servers, and I see that as annoying, but there's a reason that you're paying for that, and it's for an enjoyable internet experience.
I mean, I'm not an expert when it comes to that thing. I don't know exactly how much it cost, but I just feel like on the PC, you buy a game, and oftentimes the game is a lot cheaper, and you go online and it doesn't cost you anything extra. That's just included in the price of the game. So I sort of feel like the cost of the game is more than enough to offset the cost of allowing you to go online and get a decent connection. Now, I can't actually go in and see how much these servers are costing, how much profit that they're making, but it worked on the PS3, it worked on the PC, so I tend to think it could work on these consoles, and that it's just a way for them to generate additional revenue.
And, I mean, once again, we're just making guesses here, and I tend to agree with you, but I also look at PC servers that run, say when they're running a server that's playing Battlefield 3, you generally see a lot of advertisements on them. You're seeing, and probably they're pretty good, but there's less of them, or maybe you're playing at the will of whoever runs that servers. The company, maybe it's Valve or maybe it's EA, they're running that server, and there's only so many people who can play on it. Then you're playing on a private server, and that's when things can get, iffy, or all of a sudden you're dealing with a lot of latency issues. Also, I see with the PC, you have a lot of servers that start getting shut down. Now, you also see this with PlayStation 3. With the Xbox 360, it just seems to me, and I would have to look this up, but you want to play a game, well, that's a bad example because I know Half-Life 2 was shut down. But to my knowledge, I don't think any Xbox 360 games have really faced that issue with all of a sudden the server goes down.
That's correct as far as I know, but I also think that the original Xbox Live stopped working like a few years ago. So and mostly with the PC, it's usually games that are like over 10 years old that stop working. So I'd say it's kind of the same concept. The Xbox 360 is only about 7 or 8 years old, so most of the games are still going to be supported. But then after you get to the 10-year point, just like with the PC, just like anything that's over 10 or 15 years old, I think they're just going to stop supporting it eventually, and they're going to tell you that you need to go on the Xbox One, just like they did with the original Xbox. I'm just speaking from my experience. This isn't a scientific test. I haven't compared the servers in any way, but just in general, for PC games online, I feel like the online experience has been good. I haven't had all that much lag, and I'm talking about games that aren't indie games. I don't mean like Minecraft or Terraria. I've had some problems with those games myself, and privately run servers. I'm talking about servers that are run by the companies themselves, like EA or Valve or whoever published the game.
And I'm kind of a bad example because I don't play online games that much, so I couldn't tell you just how much difference there is. I don't even have Xbox Live on my 360, which is what a lot of people say is one of the best experiences of the... If you enjoy that, you have the ability to pay for it. If you wanted to just play it like online and not really pay for that experience, then it's an issue.
I feel like that was one of the major points of why I preferred the PS3 over the Xbox 360, is that there wasn't that fee, and then they're adding that fee in with the PlayStation 4, so that just kind of bothered me. And I guess they can get away with it. I know they can, because the Xbox One, they kind of blundered up there, especially during the beginning, so a lot of people are still going to buy the PlayStation 4. I might too, but that's just one of the downsides to it. But I guess that's what they're counting on. You complain about it, but then you still go out and get it, so it doesn't really mean as much.
Well, I think when you say that, it's not because people are just hypocrites. It's just people weigh both sides of the issue. They say, right, on one hand, I don't want to pay for an online experience, but on the other hand, I want to enjoy this online experience. And that just... people, kind of like buying a console in the first place, you want to play an Xbox One, or if you want to play an PS4, then you have to pay for it. I would love to play the games from the PlayStation 4, but not actually pay to buy one. I have a PlayStation 3, why do I have to pay that money? But it's just for the experience. Once again, I have that, if I want that experience of internet, and I want to have that enjoyment, I want to play Halo with my friends, or I want to play Battlefield with my friends and have that massive server, then it annoys me, but I'm going to pay for it because I know that experience is going to be good. And that's what I think many people are thinking. Oh, the experience is going to be good. It annoys me, but I'll begrudgingly pay it, and then you enjoy yourself. It's kind of like buying a subscription to a magazine. Every month I enjoy it, but I definitely don't enjoy paying for it.
I just feel like you're already paying for the game itself, you're already paying for the console, that they're just finding too many different ways to nickel and dime you. On this DLC, that's not really a criticism of the Xbox One itself, but I'm just saying that it seems like gaming in general, they're trying to find more and more ways to charge you for it, and more ways to get revenue outside just the cost of the game itself.
Well, I see also by that logic, I'm already paying $30. I don't see why I have to pay the extra $30 for a $60 game. You're kind of... You want the DLC? Well, you don't have to buy it. You don't have to buy the game, but you know that it's going to be enjoyable, or you have that belief that it's going to be enjoyable, so you pay for it. And I don't like paying for DLC. I don't like paying for online. I think when you start to say, oh, they're nickel and diming me, well, they're charging me for entertainment package, just kind of like going to the movies. If I go to the movies I know they're going to charge me more than the Walmart down the street for that bucket of popcorn and for the candy, but that's kind of the experience that I'm buying into. It's eating popcorn, drinking a Coke, and watching a good movie. Yes, they're nickel and diming me, but yes, I'm also enjoying the experience, and I will go back. I'm not going to complain too long. It might be a joke, but you're just saying, yep, I'm going to do it tomorrow, so that's what you do.
I guess that's fair enough. That I still feel like, when it gets to a certain point, eventually you say, I've decided that it isn't worth it anymore, that I don't feel like I'm getting as full of an experience as I would on an alternative platform like Steam, or I don't feel like I'm getting as much out of it. So, sometimes you say you're getting your money's worth, and sometimes I feel like I'm not. Another point is I kind of wanted to go over some of the older features of Xbox One that were later revoked. Like you remember these, right? They used to have 24-hour mandatory online check-ins. They used to have region locking, and not only was it region locked, but you couldn't even take the Xbox One from one country to a different one because it would detect that you took it to a different country, and then it wouldn't let you play due to the online check-ins. And then on top of that, they had those restrictions on loaning games, on used games, etc. And they later revoked those, which I'm glad they did. But one of the things they also took away was the ability to share games digitally. And again, this was kind of a gimped feature because it was up to the publishers to decide whether or not you could trade the game, and it was up to them to decide if there was a fee, how much it was. But it was still kind of nice to have that option in there, and they just completely got rid of that. And I think they could have kept that if it was just applied to digital games. And there was also the family sharing feature. I don't know the details of this, but apparently it was going to allow people to share a game with people they marked it as their family, so maybe someone else who didn't physically have that game. I think it was up to 10 family members could play it, just not simultaneously. Like, so I could play it, then I could maybe stop for an hour, and then another family member could play it for an hour, then another one for an hour. And they just got rid of that completely. Felt that the digital sharing and family sharing features were worth enduring the 24-hour check-ins. They said, I have my internet on all the time. I don't care about the online check-ins. I just want to have the family sharing plan. I want to have the digital sharing plan. That was something that was going to be revolutionary. It was going to be all digital. I want the old Xbox. There was even a petition saying that they wanted the old Xbox One back. What's your take on that? Do you have any preference when it comes to the Xbox One?
Well, I have to look at, from one perspective, I never like features being taken away. I like the idea that I can take my 360 or PlayStation 3 anywhere and not have to connect it online to play it. I know in the past I've had times when I actually was without the internet. And now I look at what state I am now. I have the internet. I have wireless internet I can always use. I have a stable internet connection that I can use at all times. But that would be the major concern I had. It doesn't even apply to me right now. And I can see almost nothing but benefits from what they're implementing. It's annoying, but from a standpoint that I have to look at, like a practical standpoint, the only thing was beneficial to me. I could take the Blu-ray, I could load it onto my machine, and then I could actually just keep my Blu-rays in the shelf or keep them in storage, and that just saves me a lot of space. I don't have to worry about losing a Blu-ray or misplacing it. It would just, all my games would be loaded onto my Xbox One, and I saw that as beneficial. There is a case where the family sharing doesn't really apply to me. Now I do buy some used games, and I saw that there would be an issue that if I wanted to buy a used game, it would no longer be anywhere as cheap, and it would probably be just better for me to buy a new game. And I saw that as negatively affecting some of the prices that I would have to pay. But I also look on the other spectrum. These game developers are always basically you're seeing them fail sometimes. Games that were going to be successful, oh, they're not successful. They only sold so many games. You could say that's a failure on their ability to estimate how popular their game would be. But you could also say, what are some of the negative things that are affecting game sales? Well, the ability to buy used games. Well, we could all say, oh, that's, for every used game sold, a new one was bought. But that new one was bought and then sold, and then another person bought that used game and then sold it and bought. It's a vicious cycle where maybe 3, maybe 4 people played this one Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 game. They all played it, but there is no income going back to the publisher. That's kind of an issue. It's kind of like a game rental service, but there's no extended benefit for the publisher. They just get that single person who buys it in the very beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you think it would support the publishers more, and that the publishers would be able to come out with more games if they put more restrictions on used game sales?
Well, once again, it's any restriction on used game sales from the initial standpoint is always going to be beneficial to the publisher. They're getting more sales. Any used game sales now goes into new game sales. You could say, oh, well...
And I just wanted to point out, I don't think they were getting rid of used games entirely. It was just that the publisher could decide if you could sell them or not, and they could decide to charge a fee if they wanted. So by that point, if they were charging this fee, it'd probably be a lot more expensive to get used games. And like you said, it's almost better to just get the new game. And
I would see that as a negative in the fact that, yes, I would be paying more for used games, but if I see some of the other game outlet, maybe Steam, for example, or Origin, you're seeing better sales. They're kind of competing with all of a sudden digital markets and PC markets on the computer. You're not seeing people buying used anymore, so that kind of, those bargain hunters now are looking for sales. And I think would it have been that with these restrictions, all of a sudden the games may have started to go down in price. Would they have? I don't know. It's kind of up to Microsoft and the PlayStation 4 to prove that point with their downloadable games. And I think as we're nearing more a digital future and we're dealing with games being sold online, there's day one digital, I think that's when they can start focusing, and that's when they can start showing us that a game on digital download, they don't have to deal with used game sales. If you buy it digitally, that is yours. You cannot sell it back. So I think that's when they can prove they don't need the used markets to really make those great deals. If they prove it or not, that's kind of for history to show us.
It's ironic because in terms of digital sales, prior to the Xbox One's restrictions, you could actually believe you could trade a digital game one time or sell it to a friend. After Microsoft revoked the restrictions, they removed digital trading. So digital selling is basically like it is now. It's locked to your account. It can never be sold to another account. And so, in a sense, digital games don't have to deal with that used market. Microsoft would, and the Sony, Nintendo, they would charge a lot less money for a digital game than they would for a physical game because they don't have to deal with the middlemans like GameStop and Walmart. They don't have to deal with shipping and manufacturing. They don't have to deal with the risk of someone selling a used game. So it seems like they would try to charge a cheaper price in order to incentivize people to go digital as opposed to getting physical games, but it doesn't really seem like that's been happening all that often. It seems like they charge the same price regardless of whether you get it physically or digitally. Like you said, it's up to the publisher, but knowing these companies, I tend to think that they just say this is going to be extra profit for us and that they wouldn't try to reduce the price because that doesn't seem like what they've been doing previously, even when they had the opportunity to.
Well, and I also think it's a new market where they're pretty afraid that they're putting a lot of money into this new game, If they did lower the price, how much benefit would they see on their end? How many more sales would they get for that $20 off? And you can imagine if you sold a game at half the price, like a new Halo game was coming out, if they sold it for half the price, how much would double the amount of people buy it? And if double the amount of people buy it, they're just getting it, basically they're just breaking even, and then in the same frame, then less people would buy it down the line because more people own it. You can also see where some of the games which it doesn't matter as much, with the Nintendo store selling off their kind of older games like the Zelda 64, Super Mario games. You also see it with the PlayStation Network shop, with the older PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 games. If you buy those games on the market, just in a physical copy, you're going to spend a lot of money to find a copy of the old JRPG Final Fantasy. If you buy it on the PlayStation Network, it's $10, maybe $5 on a sale. I think that's when they're kind of testing the water with that. To a lesser extent, the Xbox 360, just because it doesn't have the kind of back catalog. Now, it is selling some of the games. I would have to look for it. I don't think they have Halo, and that's kind of why not. They should just go out and sell Halo, the original, because I don't know how many Xbox Ones they're selling right now. But you start thinking, okay, with the back catalog they've developed with the PlayStation or the Xbox 360, then maybe they can implement a feature like the PlayStation Network store or what Nintendo and what they did.
Lavitch showed me an article on Gama Sutra which stated that in general, when games go for sale on Steam, the sales of the games increase by more than just the amount they're decreasing it by. What I mean by that is when the Binding of Isaac's price was cut in half, their sales didn't just doubled, they jumped by more than 5 times the regular amount. And when the game was offered during Steam's flash sale at 75% off and featured on Steam's homepage, the game sold more than 60 times their regular copies. And according to the article, these results are pretty typical, because there are people buying the game even when they don't have the time or the intention to really play it. Maybe they just want to sample it, or maybe they plan to play it at some point in the future. There are people buying up copies for friends. There are a reason why these Steam sales are so common. So my take on it is that if Halo was sold for $30 or less, it is entirely possible that more than twice as many people would purchase it, thus giving a net profit.
I'd have to look it up to be exact, but I think it was either less than a year old or even before it came out. So the infrastructure for the PlayStation Network and the Xbox Live stores, they just weren't there. And if I think back, I don't even think the Xbox 360 had a true online store when it first came out. Later on got it. I could be wrong on that. But
yeah, so you feel like...
Well, I think the infrastructure is now being built for that digital download. Now they have the server banks that they can release a game like Halo or a game like Call of Duty. So instead of piping out all the physical copies, they can say, oh, it won't cost us, or oh, it won't take so much time to download. So I think they have the infrastructure now to start competing with Steam. That may be a reason why they haven't in the past, just because of contracts and because of the way they have the system set up. And you can already think some of the original Xboxes don't have, or I think even to this day, you can buy an Xbox 360 without a hard drive. Or the PlayStation 3, they had 40 gigabyte hard drives, 60 gigabyte hard drives. Sure, now you're seeing 500, but I think a lot of people on the market even today have machines without that kind of hard drive capacity, and you're just seeing right off the bat 500 gigabyte. That's the standard, and I think that's going to grow exponentially, 1 terabyte, 3 terabytes. I just see that as the future of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. And I think that's when game publishers and developers they can say that how many people own an Xbox 360, well, couple that with how many people own an Xbox 360 without a hard drive. Now they can say everyone owns an Xbox One with the 500 gigabyte hard drive. They're going to have the ability to take that game and download it, so we can cut that price, and we can expect that price, that lower price, 100% of the people will have the ability to use it because they have the capacity and they have the internet connection.
So I guess the point could be made for both sides. Again, it's ultimately up to the company, but it's possible that they could lower the prices. It's possible that they might not. So I guess we'll just find out. In terms of exclusives, I feel like the Xbox One lineup isn't quite as strong as the PS4. Of course, it's still the launch title. Neither have all that many, but I remember, during the Xbox One E3 conference, they were mentioning, we have, Titanfall, and we have these Xbox One exclusive, and it's only made available on the Xbox One architecture. But actually, it was also being released for PC, and that really bothers me when they say it's an Xbox exclusive, or it's a PlayStation exclusive, but then it also comes on the PC, because that's still a legitimate platform. It's one, the Xbox One doesn't have as many as exclusive or as many games as it should have, and two, it bothers me that they would try to what I essentially see as deceiving us.
Well, I never saw that where they exactly quoted where they said the game was an exclusive to the Xbox One, and then came around and said, well, it's also coming out on the PC. I think, if they just said that, that's lying, or it could be false articles or false reporting by a company.
I was watching the E3, so I double-checked it. Maybe he slipped and made a mistake, I don't know, but they said it was an Xbox exclusive, and it also comes on PC.
That annoys me. I haven't really saw that, but that's annoying to me. That's kind of a slip-up, but it's not going to really affect me in any way purchasing it just from that slip-up. Yes, the more exclusives that it has, the better looking a system is. I like the PlayStation 3 because it has a lot of JRPG exclusives. I like the Xbox 360 because it has a wonderful Halo series, and I kind of expect that in the future. There is going to be some exclusives that are either Xbox One exclusives, or I can look forward to the experience being best on that system. Maybe it'll make a port to the computer, but like with the original Halo, the port was never as good as the original, just from the... Well, I can't say that because that's getting into subjective terms, but it was released way later on games for Windows, and it was handicapped by some of those things. When they also say how many launch titles there are, I'm going to say I just don't buy that many games at one time. So say if the game system had a launch of 20 games for launch, it's crazy, but they could advertise it, I would actually see that as negative, because I would say, okay, 20 games were rushed for that launch, kind of to me, made for that exclusivity of coming out right when the Xbox One was launching. I'm going to rather say, okay, maybe release 5 really good games at launch, and then coming out in 5 months, release 5 more good games. So then about the time I'm done with that first game, I'm going to look forward to another game, and it's not going to be burdened by that rushed feel. That maybe they're working on it for a whole long time, and maybe that launch game is going to be awesome, but my experience is the launch games are already subpar. So that's why not many games coming out at launch, that doesn't really bother me. I just look for good games, and I think right now some of my favorite ones are not exclusive on the Xbox One, but I know if I buy that Xbox One, there are games coming out for it that I really am looking forward to.
Mm-hmm. And keep in mind, I'm not just... I guess I should have specified this more because I was being kind of vague, but I'm not even just referring to launch titles or games that are coming out this year. I'm even talking about just games that they're talking about that they said they would come out at some point in the future, like the next Halo, for example. I feel like that's kind of... No,
It
what was
was
that?
a
Dead something.
there was the mech game
Yeah.
that originally I don't know if I don't believe they've said it's exclusive. That would be the one that I think might have been said that it's exclusive, but it's also coming out on PC.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, if I buy a system, I'm not going to be terribly upset if that game comes out for the computer or the PlayStation 4. What I would be upset about is if the experience I'm having on the Xbox One was not as good as, say, the PlayStation 4 or the computer. And while the computer always has some little graphical tweaks, I don't think as far as the core gameplay and as far as the core game goes, I'm never going to get a subpar experience. I'm going to enjoy that experience. And yes, I could enjoy it on the PlayStation 4, but that doesn't really affect me if I own an Xbox One. That's just kind of like, oh, more people can enjoy this game. I still enjoy this game on my Xbox One.
Let's see, I think Forza, Quantum Break, D4, Crimson Dragon, and of course Halo. I already mentioned that. But I guess I just feel like one of the primary reasons that I get a console is for exclusive games. So, like if there are two consoles and one console has 4 multi-platform games and 1 exclusive, and another console has all those same multi-platform games and 5 exclusives, I'm obviously going to choose the one that has the most exclusive titles. So that's just one of the major incentives for me to buy a console is, that's what I look at. What exclusive games does it have? And I think the less exclusive games the Xbox One has, or the less exclusive games any console has, the less likely I am to buy it. That's kind of one of the major reasons why I've held off on getting Wii U, is because even though they have all of these ports that usually they're late, a lot of times they have features missing, but in terms of exclusive, Wii U hasn't done all that well. So,
well, that's one of the funny things I was going to actually bring up, because if you look at which system has the most exclusives, yes, the Wii U has been out longer, but even before, when it was first being advertised, the Wii U actually had more exclusives, I would argue. It has the Nintendo, it has the Zelda, it has the Super Smash Brothers, it has a lot of games coming out for it, and I think you can also say, okay, they're going to come out, but they're going to come out at a later date. Mm-hmm. But I think if you look at the Wii U and look at a year after it's released, then look at the PlayStation 4 and look at the Xbox One within a year of its release, I would really bet you money that the Wii U is going to have the most exclusives, but just coming from a personal standpoint, I have no real interest in the Wii U because just the gaming experience isn't what I really want. It's not as enjoyable to me. I have no real interest in the Wii U. I think if I bought an Xbox One, that gaming experience, I'm looking for that gaming experience that is with the Xbox, and I think it's going to be better. I can only guess now. I haven't seen a lot of it, but just from a hardware standpoint, it's already bounds above the Wii U, so they have the ability. Now, that's what I'm kind of excited for.
So, what is it that you don't like about the Wii U? Is it just the hardware, or?
I would say that's a major part in it. Just the fact that I think the controller looks more comfortable for long uses. Now, I think I have not used the Wii U controller. I can't say how easy it is, but it just, to me, a lot of it, you look at the history, I've been using a controller very similar to the Xbox Xbox One, since the Dreamcast. And even, with the Nintendo 64 almost to an effect. So it's just, the controller is better. The games, I think, are going to be better. I can only say that because I look at the hardware, but also if I want to look at, say, I'm looking at buying an Xbox One over an Xbox 360, yes, they can make very good games for the Xbox 360. They have. But still, you can say with the Xbox One, you're getting more advanced hardware. You're getting a better Kinect. There's things with the Xbox One that has been designed for a digital future, and I think with the with the Wii U, it just doesn't really have that benefit. It's an old console. It's using technology from, barely over the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, and they've been out for a long time. So, yes, I think Nintendo is going to make beautiful games with it. They've always made really good games. But from the standpoint, a game, say if EA makes a game for the Wii U, and then they also make a game for the Xbox One, I'm going to think the game for the Xbox One is going to be more enjoyable. It's subjective to how much better it is, but yes, it's mainly the hardware, and because of that hardware, I think software is going to end up being more enjoyable.
Is there anything else other than the hardware that you don't like, and the controller that you don't like about the Wii U, or?
I mean, there's also something to be said that the Wii U is not doing as good in sales as they had hoped. Now, I can't say how good the Xbox One is selling at the moment. I mean, they're selling pre-orders, but when the Wii U has been out for as long as it has been, and multiple companies have been saying that until the Wii U starts seeing major changes in sales, they're just not going to produce for it. That's a major red flag for me that this system is not going to have a lot of good games until they start seeing a change in sales. And I think right now the Wii U is kind of doomed to have worse and worse games because no one's going to program for a machine that no one buys.
So it's kind of like the Vita. As many people want to buy a Vita because it doesn't have games, and not as many developers want to develop for it because there aren't people buying the Vita. So it's kind of a similar thing, or?
I think a lot of comparisons can be made on that front. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Fair enough. Nintendo kind of predicts that if they start getting exclusive titles in, that the Wii U sales numbers are going to increase. I tend to agree, but one thing that bothers me is why didn't they have more exclusives during launch? I mean, I keep seeing these articles. They say, it takes so long to produce these HD games, and we want to make the game experience as good as possible. But then I'm also thinking, but didn't you know this prior to making the console? I mean, are you just now finding this out? You couldn't have been producing games for years up until now? I mean, the hardware for the Wii U, like you mentioned, is just over the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360, so it seems like they could have been better prepared and have a better launch lineup. And by now, after like 8-9 months after the Wii U is launched, you would think they would have a more solid lineup of games by now, and they really don't. So I guess that's probably a major reason why the Wii U hasn't sold as much.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also look at it, Nintendo can only make so many games themselves. Mm-hmm. If I look at the PlayStation 3, Sony did make several games for it, several really good games, Killzone, SOCOM, and even some like Little Big Planet. But if you just take away all the third-party games, the PlayStation 3 just didn't have a huge library. I mean, it does now, but... And I think even back when the PlayStation 3 first was released, they didn't have a lot of games, and that was a major issue people had with buying the PlayStation 3. Right. Luckily, that turned around, but I think that's why you see the Xbox 360 dominating the market right now, is just it had those good games from both the first-party and third-party developers. And one thing I want to bring up, I think a lot of what they did right was kind of make the digital front. They started selling indie games that were really popular, and you see Super Meat Boy, you see even, it was later on in its life, but the success of Minecraft. You pick out some of those indie games that people love to play, and they buy the system, and then all of a sudden those developers see that so many people have bought the system, they start making more games for it. It's kind of remains to be seen if the Xbox or the PlayStation 4 will kind of tap into that market. And right now I have to admit, I like what the PlayStation 4 is doing with the more indie developers, and it seems to be kind of focused on bringing in a lot of indie developers, but they've also said that some people say the Xbox One still has good indie support, and I think with the Xbox Live, they could really use that. And I've also seen a lot of the indie developers kind of make use of new technology. Now, it's kind of with the Wii, you saw a lot of shovelware where there's just not a lot of quality stuff coming out, but you saw a lot of interesting small games that use the motion controls. I think with the ability of the Kinect, you may be able to see that. They can make a goofy little game with the Kinect, and I think that could sell great.
I just want to address one point you made about, I think you said now the Xbox 360 is dominating the market. Well, what did you mean by that? Because aren't the sales for the PS3 and Xbox 360 pretty close now? Or
I would have to look. New sales, now I believe that you are correct. More PlayStation 3s are being sold than the Xbox 360, but that is a relatively new change. And once again, you're looking at a system very late in their life. So the PlayStation 3 may sell 100,000, and the Xbox may sell 80,000 within a month. You're looking at a difference maybe 4 years ago where the Xbox 360 was selling 500,000 a month, and the PlayStation 3 was selling 300. So I can't tell you the exact numbers of systems sold, but I think this console generation was won by Xbox 360 just as far as sheer number of games sold, and you could say money made for the company. A lot of people have Xbox Live. They're making those advertisements. I think Microsoft is making more money off of the Xbox 360 than Sony is being made, or money is being made off the PlayStation 3 for Sony.
Hold on, I just looked up the figures right now. So we sold 99.8 million, so basically 100 million Wiis. Xbox 360 sold 77 million, and it says PlayStation 3 sold about between 75 and 78 million that they haven't gotten the full estimate for this month yet, but basically it looks like in terms of total sales, Sony and Xbox 360 are about tied, with the Wii having the most sales out of this generation. Of course, Xbox 360 launched a year early, then there was that fiasco with the $599 US thing, so during the beginning, Xbox 360 was doing really well at the beginning, but if you're just talking in terms of sales numbers, the Wii did the best. So would you argue that the Wii won the console generation? Or?
Well, I would argue from the point, who made the most money from games sold, from content sold, and that's really, those numbers are unknown to me. I do know the original PlayStation 3s were quite expensive. They're actually selling them for a loss. I know the Wii is quite cheap to make. That was one of the things. They made a lot of money off of each Wii sold, but I think the 360 almost won from just the fact that they made a lot of money for each 360 sold. They lost a lot of money with the Red Ring of Death, but overall, and with the Xbox Live included, and with, you say, those advertisements, those are making Microsoft a lot of money. That turns around for a more profitable venture, and that means the investors are going to be more eager to support the system that will make the most money. Investors, and those are kind of things that will really help a company back up a system. you can kind of make that magic work, or if I'm just talking out of my side, that's they could say like, oh, the Xbox is still losing money. I would not really know that, but I think the Xbox 360 was, I would still say, the victor of this generation, although I couldn't really back that up with too much factual evidence.
Whether or not they were the victors, up in the air, because there are so many subjective terms you could measure. I just don't fair to say they dominated it in the way that maybe the Sony dominated the previous generation with the PS2, because like the PS2 sold 155 million consoles. It was just like a juggernaut. Like the Xbox, the GameCube didn't even do half as much. But with this console war or battle or just competition, whatever you want to call it, I feel like it's pretty evenly matched, and I don't think that there's a clear-cut winner. And I think a case could be made for all three companies here.
I would agree.
And there was one other thing I wanted to bring up. With the Xbox One, it seems they don't allow indie developers to self-publish games. And then on top of that, I mean, I'm not a developer, I'm not a professional, but just from like articles I've read, I think developers are talking about it, and from people talking about it, I believe the PS4 is going to be easier to develop on than the Xbox One. And I think of that as a good thing, because that means you're going to get, if there's a multi-plat game, they're going to make it easier for them to add it to the PlayStation 4 as well. It's going to make it easier to develop more exclusive games. It's going to make it easier for low-budget indie developers to get their game on the PS4 without going through a lot of hoops. So I think that's a really positive attribute for it, that you're going to see a lot more games on it.
I would say I would agree with you that is a point in Sony's favor. Now, how much it would affect us, I see like the Xbox 360 had a huge indie support. There were some very good games that came out of it, but there were a lot of crap games. And I also see, like, on the PC market, it's very easy. You can almost just develop a game in your basement and then sell it off of an online website. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of games available that sometimes that is good, and some that kind of bites you in the ass. And with like, I look at the Wii, it had just had a lot of shovelware that really wasn't that enjoyable. And I don't know how much harder. I think both the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 are using pretty similar architecture and similar CPU parts. The Xbox 360 did this, and it was very successful. The PlayStation 3 had the cell architecture, which was much harder to program for. With the Xbox One, it's kind of hard to tell, is it going to be as easy to program for? I think there is a little bit more change, like they're being a little bit more experimental in the SRAM and how that will function. I don't know if it's going to be real beneficial. I couldn't really tell you at this point. But I do see with some of the inclusives like the Kinect, is it going to be more like an indie developer? It'll be harder to program for the Xbox One, but is the game going to be better? I don't know.
So overall, you think it's still in Sony's favor, but you're concerned about shovelware too, that you don't want too many bad titles making their way on?
Yeah, that's what I would say, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Alright, I think that about wraps things up there.
Okay.